My name is Lauren Vance. I am 29 years old, and last Saturday, I stood at the head table of my stepsister's $180,000 wedding reception, holding a glass of sparkling water in one hand and a black leather binder in the other. Across the gilded ballroom of the Grand Oak Manor, surrounded by 200 high society guests, corporate investors, and catering staff, my stepmother, Evelyn, was beaming. My stepsister, Chloe, in a custom Italian silk gown, was laughing into her glass of vintage champagne. They thought they had pulled off the ultimate triumph. They thought the quiet, plain-looking accountant in the corner had paid for their fairy tale without ever realizing she had been robbed. They were wrong. When the maid of honor handed me the microphone for what everyone assumed was a standard toast, I didn't offer a sweet story about childhood memories. Instead, I opened the black binder, adjusted my glasses, and read out 12 specific wire transfer confirmation numbers spanning 18 months. I listed exact dates, bank accounts, forged signatures, and the $2.4 million that had been systematically drained from my late mother's irrevocable trust fund. The money meant to build a pediatric oncology wing in my mother's name. Before we get into the rest of this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this narrative truly speaks to you. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I genuinely love seeing where you're joining me from. Now, let me take you back 3 years to a quiet hospital room in Boston, Massachusetts, and the day my mother, Alina, held my hand for the very last time. Growing up, my mother was my entire world. She was a brilliant forensic accountant who built a successful financial advisory firm from the ground up. She was sharp, meticulous, and fiercely independent, but above all, she possessed a quiet, profound grace. My father passed away when I was 6, leaving my mother to raise me alone. She taught me how to read bank statements before I was 10. She used to sit with me at the oak dining table, spreading out spreadsheets, showing me how every dollar tells a story if you know how to follow the trail. "Numbers don't lie, Lauren," she'd tell me, her thumb tracing the edge of my paper. "People twist facts, people invent narratives, but the paper trail always tells the truth. Always respect the audit." When I was 22, my mother made a decision that would alter the rest of our lives. She married Richard Vance. Richard was a charm-heavy real estate developer whose lavish lifestyle was supported almost entirely by credit lines and precarious loans. He came with a package deal: his second wife's daughter, Chloe, who was 2 years younger than me. From the moment Richard and Chloe moved into our home, the atmosphere shifted. My mother tried desperately to build a cohesive family. She paid off Richard's personal debts, funded Chloe's private university tuition, and opened our doors to them unconditionally. But Evelyn, Richard's sister who acted as his primary business manager and eventually took over his household affairs after Richard's sudden heart attack 4 years ago, never saw us as family. She saw my mother as a bank vault with a heartbeat. When my mother was diagnosed with terminal ovarian cancer in 2023, the vultures began circling before the first round of chemotherapy even ended. Evelyn started dropping subtle hints about simplifying the estate. Chloe suddenly developed a keen interest in my mother's jewelry collection, but my mother was no fool. 6 months before she passed, she established the Alina Vance Legacy Trust. The terms were airtight, or so we believed. The trust contained $3.2 million from her life insurance policies, investment portfolio, and liquid assets. The structure was specific. I was named the primary beneficiary upon reaching my 30th birthday, which was set for this coming November. However, the trust explicitly mandated that $2.4 million of the capital was designated to fund the Alina Vance Pediatric Oncology Pavilion at St. Jude's Research Hospital. My stepmother Evelyn was appointed as a co-trustee alongside a corporate bank representative, tasked only with maintaining the accounts until my 30th birthday. On a rainy Tuesday in October 2023, my mother passed away. I was 26 years old. I sat by her bed in the hospice, holding her cold, fragile hand as the monitor went flat. Neither Evelyn nor Chloe came to the hospice that morning. Evelyn claimed she had an urgent real estate closing. Chloe said she couldn't handle the negative energy of a hospice ward. I stood alone in a chapel built for 80 people, reading my mother's eulogy to 3 of her former colleagues and the hospice nurses who had grown fond of her. I didn't cry that day, not because I wasn't broken, but because I was completely hollowed out. After the funeral, Evelyn and Chloe moved into my mother's primary residence, a historical brownstone in Beacon Hill, claiming they needed to manage the property. Within 3 months, they had moved my mother's paintings into the attic, replaced her vintage furniture with velvet designer couches, and turned my childhood bedroom into Chloe's walk-in closet. When I came to collect my mother's personal journals and her old financial ledgers, Evelyn met me at the front door, holding a mug of tea my mother had bought in London. "You really shouldn't be dwelling on the past, Lauren," Evelyn said smoothly, leaning against the doorframe. "You have your little apartment in Somerville. You have your junior accounting job. Let Chloe have her moment. She's engaged to Arthur Sterling, you know. The Sterling family is top-tier Boston society. We have appearances to maintain." I looked at my stepmother. I looked at the way she wore my mother's pearl necklace, the one my father had given her for their 5th anniversary. I didn't yell. I didn't demand the keys. I simply took the box of journals I had managed to gather, walked down the granite steps, and drove back to my small apartment. I poured every ounce of my grief into my work. I earned my senior certified forensic accountant, CRFA, credential. I spent 80 hours a week at my firm, dissecting corporate fraud, auditing complex shell companies, and tracing hidden assets for high-stakes litigation. I became the person my mother knew I could be. I built a quiet, stable life brick by brick, with my own hands, completely independent of the Vance name. Then, 6 months ago, the invitations went out. Chloe Vance was marrying Arthur Sterling Jr., the heir to a major shipping conglomerate. It was to be the event of the Boston social season. The venue, Grand Oak Manor. The catering, a Michelin-starred team from New York. The dress, a $45,000 custom piece imported from Milan. A 4-tier cake decorated with edible gold leaf, a 20-piece orchestra, and imported white peonies filling every square inch of the ballroom. Total estimated cost, $180,000. I received my invitation in the mail. It was a formal, heavy cardstock envelope. Inside, my name was misspelled as Lauren. Beneath it, written in Chloe's looping handwriting, was a note: "We'd love for you to attend. Table 18 is reserved for distant relatives and staff." I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the misspelled name. I knew Evelyn's financial situation. My father's estate had been completely liquidated to pay off his failed development projects 3 years prior. Evelyn worked part-time as an interior design consultant. Chloe was an unemployed, lifestyle influencer. Where was $180,000 coming from? How were they paying $12,000 retainer fees to celebrity florists? The question sat in my chest like a lead weight. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up the public probate filings for the Eleanor Vance Legacy Trust. What I found made my blood run cold. As a beneficiary, I was entitled to annual summary statements. For the past 2 years, Evelyn had sent me short, formal PDFs generated on generic stationery, showing that the trust balance was steady at $3.2 million, earning modest interest in low-risk treasury bonds. But as a certified forensic auditor, I knew how to look past a summary PDF. I filed a formal beneficiary demand for underlying bank transaction, logs directly with the corporate custodian, First New England Wealth Management. Because I was less than a year away from my 30th birthday, the bank was legally required to comply within 10 business days. When the 200-page transaction ledger arrived in my encrypted portal on a rainy Thursday night in January, I sat down with a cup of black coffee and began the audit. By 2:00 a.m., the full scope of Evelyn's deception lay exposed on my dual monitors. It wasn't just a mismanaged account. It was a systematic, calculated demolition of my mother's legacy. Starting in November 2024, exactly 13 months after my mother died, Evelyn had executed the first wire transfer. She had exploited a loophole in the co-trustee agreement by fabricating authorization letters bearing my forged signature, claiming I had consented to pre-distribution administrative expenses. the money hadn't been invested in treasury bonds. It had been funneled through 3 separate limited liability companies established in Delaware under fake names: EEV Holdings, Northern Coast Capital, and Clover Design LLC. I traced every single dollar. $45,000 transferred to a bridal atelier in Milan. $12,000 wired to a floral designer in Manhattan. $28,000 paid directly to the Grand Oak Manor venue deposit. $65,000 drawn in direct cash withdrawals over 14 months, used for luxury spa visits, designer handbags, and monthly leases on 2 late-model Mercedes-Benz SUVs. $1.2 million moved into a high-risk offshore trading account that had lost 80% of its value in speculative crypto trades, managed by Evelyn's nephew. Of the original $3.2 million, less than $300,000 remained in the trust. The $2.4 million designated for the pediatric cancer wing at St. Jude was gone, erased, spent on silk, champagne, gold leaf, and high society posturing. I sat in the dark of my apartment as the clock on my wall ticked past 3:00 a.m. I could feel my mother's presence in the room, her voice echoing from those weekend lessons at our oak table. Follow the paper trail, Lauren. Respect the audit. I had 2 choices. Option A, call a lawyer immediately, file an emergency injunction, freeze the remaining accounts, and stop the wedding before it happened. That would be the quiet way. It would result in months of tedious pretrial motions, confidential settlements behind closed doors, and Evelyn spinning a narrative to the media that I was a bitter, jealous stepdaughter trying to ruin Chloe's special day out of spite. Option B, let them have their day. Let them assemble every single investor, every wealthy socialite, every member of the Sterling family, and every legal stakeholder under one roof. Let them stand in front of 200 witnesses at the peak of their arrogance, and then deliver the audit in real time. I chose option B. Now I need to pause here for a moment. What would you have done if you discovered your mother's charity trust had been stolen to pay for a luxury wedding? Option A, stop it quietly through court before the wedding. Option B, expose everything publicly at the reception. Drop your choice in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because the climax of this story is something you need to hear. For the next 3 months, I became a ghost. I didn't confront Evelyn. I didn't message Chloe. When Chloe sent a group text asking if I could chip in $500 for her bachelorette party in Miami, I politely texted back that my budget was tight, but I wished her the best. Evelyn called me once in February, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, asking if I'd be willing to sign an updated administrative waiver for the bank. I told her I was busy with tax season and would look at it after April. Meanwhile, I worked relentlessly with Jonathan Ellis, my mother's original corporate attorney who had been pushed out by Evelyn 2 years prior. Together, we assembled a bulletproof legal package. We secured certified affidavits from the forensic handwriting expert, proving my signatures on the wire authorizations were forged. We subpoenaed the bank records for EEV Holdings and Clover Design LLC. We obtained the Delaware corporate filings, linking those shell companies directly to Evelyn Vance's Social Security number. We also contacted the legal board of St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Their chief legal officer, a formidable woman named District Attorney Representative Alina Ross, was appalled. The hospital formally joined our civil petition and alerted the state attorney general's Financial Crimes Division. Everything was set. The trap was laid, reinforced, and locked tight. Saturday, June 14, 2026, the wedding day. The Grand Oak Manor was spectacular. The afternoon sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling stained glass windows, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and massive arrangements of white peonies. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged wine, and roasted meats. 200 guests filled the grand ballroom: Boston elite, shipping executives, local politicians, and judges. Chloe was breathless in her Italian silk, holding court near the 5-tiered gold leaf cake. Evelyn wore a champagne-colored gown that cost more than my monthly rent, wearing my mother's pearl necklace, holding a flute of crystal, laughing with Arthur Sterling SR, the patriarch of the Sterling family. I arrived 30 minutes before the reception dinner. I wore a simple, tailored black suit with a crisp white silk blouse. No gown, no jewelry, no makeup except for a swipe of neutral lipstick. I carried a sleek, black leather binder tucked under my left arm. When Evelyn saw me walk through the arched entrance, her smile tightened for a fraction of a second before she smoothed her expression into patronizing pity. She glided over, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. "Lauren, dear," she whispered, stepping close enough for me to smell the champagne on her breath. "You actually came, and in a pantsuit. Well, I suppose table 18 is near the back by the kitchen service doors, so no one will notice. Just please don't speak to Arthur's father about your job. We've told everyone you're doing charity work." "I am doing charity work, Evelyn," I said, my voice completely level. "In fact, I'm working for St. Jude's tonight." She frowned, a small flicker of confusion crossing her brow, but Chloe called her over for a photo before she could process my statement. I walked to the back of the room, found table 18 wedged near the kitchen doors, and sat down quietly next to two distant cousins who didn't recognize me. The evening proceeded like clockwork. The 3-course dinner was served. The toasts began. Arthur Sterling SR gave a grand speech about family values, honor, and the merging of two great Boston names. Chloe shed delicate, practiced tears. Evelyn stood up and spoke about how she had sacrificed everything as a single mother to give Chloe the wedding of her dreams. At 8:30 p.m., the maid of honor, a socialite named Brittany, stepped up to the podium. "And now," Brittany announced into the microphone, her voice echoing through the acoustics of the ballroom, "is there anyone else who would like to offer a blessing or a word for the happy couple before we open the dance floor?" I stood up from table 18. The room was noisy, glasses clinking, laughter floating over the tables. But as I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my black leather binder held firmly in both hands, the noise began to subside. Guests turned their heads. Chloe squinted through the spotlight. Evelyn's champagne flute froze halfway to her mouth. I didn't ask for permission. I stepped onto the raised oak stage, walked directly up to Brittany, and reached out my hand for the microphone. Brittany, startled by the sheer quiet authority in my posture, handed it over without a word and stepped back. I adjusted the microphone stand. The feedback gave a brief, sharp whine that instantly silenced the remaining chatter in the room. 200 pairs of eyes fixed on me. "Good evening, everyone," I said into the microphone. My voice was clear, resonant, and devoid of any tremor. "My name is Lauren Vance. I am Alina Vance's daughter and the stepdaughter of Evelyn Vance." At the front table, Arthur Sterling SR smiled politely, assuming this was an impromptu family tribute. But Evelyn stood up from her chair so fast her napkin fell into her salad plate. "Lauren," Evelyn called out, trying to keep her voice light while projecting across the stage. "Sweetheart, this isn't on the schedule. Let's let the DJ start the music." "Sit down, Evelyn," I said into the microphone. The tone of my voice was like a steel blade dropping onto marble. The entire room went dead silent. Arthur Sterling SR's polite smile vanished. Chloe froze in her seat. "I know you've all enjoyed this evening," I continued, unclasping the black leather binder and laying it flat on the podium. "It is truly a magnificent event. The Italian silk gown, the white peonies imported from Holland, the Michelin-starred catering, the $28,000 venue fee. It's an extraordinary display of wealth. But as a certified forensic auditor, I'm always interested in how extraordinary displays of wealth are financed." "Lauren, stop this right now," Evelyn shouted, taking 2 aggressive steps toward the stage. Before she could reach the stairs, 2 men in dark gray suits who had been standing quietly near the entrance stepped forward and blocked her path. They were investigators from the Massachusetts Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division, accompanied by Representative Alina Ross from St. Jude. The ballroom gasped. "For the past 18 months, I spoke clearly into the mic, flipping to page 1 of the audit report, Evelyn Vance has operated a systematic financial fraud scheme. She created 3 illegal Delaware shell entities: EEV Holdings, Northern Coast Capital, and Clover Design LLC. Using forged signatures bearing my name, she systematically drained the Alina Vance Legacy Trust, a trust established by my late mother. "That's a lie," Chloe shrieked, standing up, her hands clutching her silk dress. "She's crazy. She's jealous because nobody wants to marry her." On November 14th, 2024, I continued, ignoring the outburst entirely. Wire transfer 884921. $45,000 transferred from the Alina Vance Trust to Atelier Bridal Milan for Chloe Vance's wedding dress. On January 8th, 2025, wire transfer 901204. $12,000 transferred to Manhattan Floral Concepts. On March 22nd, 2025, wire transfer 331190. $28,000 transferred directly to Grand Oak Manor LLC for tonight's venue deposit. I looked directly at Arthur Sterling SR, whose face had turned the color of ash. "In total, $2.4 million was stolen from this trust," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "That $2.4 million was legally designated by my dying mother to build the Alina Vance Pediatric Oncology Pavilion at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Tonight, every bite of food you ate, every drop of champagne you drank, and every peony on these tables was paid for with money stolen from children fighting cancer." A collective, horrified gasp echoed across the 200 guests. Women pulled back from their plates. Men set down their wine glasses as if they had been poisoned. Arthur Sterling SR turned to look at Evelyn with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "This entire wedding," I concluded, closing the black leather binder with a firm, final thud, "is the crime scene of a $2.4 million grand larceny, and the audit is complete." I stepped down from the podium. What happened next moved with the speed and force of a collapsing building. Arthur Sterling SR stood up, looked at his son, and said 3 words that carried across the quiet room. "We are leaving." The entire Sterling family, 4 tables worth of Boston's most prominent figures, stood up in unison, pushed back their chairs, and walked out of the ballroom. Arthur Sterling Jr., the groom, looked at Chloe, took off his boutonniere, dropped it onto the floor, and followed his father without looking back. Chloe collapsed onto her knees in the middle of the dance floor, hysterical, screaming at her mother, her $45,000 Italian silk dress trailing in spilled wine. Evelyn didn't get to leave. The 2 state investigators met her at the bottom of the stage steps. In front of her remaining friends, her social peers, and the catering staff, they produced a formal warrant for grand larceny, scheme to defraud, and corporate forgery. They placed her hands behind her back and clicked the steel handcuffs over her wrists. As they led her past me toward the side exit, Evelyn looked at me. Her face was hollow, her eyes wide with a combination of rage and total ruin. "You ruined my daughter's life," she hissed, her voice cracking. "You ruined everything." I leaned in close, so only she could hear me. "I didn't ruin anything, Evelyn," I whispered. "I just audited the account. The numbers did the rest." She was led out into the rain, where 2 state police cruisers were waiting with their lights, flashing quietly against the manicured hedges of Grand Oak Manor. The civil and criminal trials took 4 months. Because the evidence was absolute, backed by forensic handwriting analysis, bank IP logs, and Delaware corporate records, Evelyn's legal team couldn't construct a defense. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of grand larceny in the 1st degree and 1 count of falsifying business records. The judge sentenced her to 7 to 12 years in state prison. Furthermore, the court ordered full asset forfeiture. My mother's Beacon Hill brownstone was seized and returned to the trust. Evelyn's personal luxury vehicles, designer wardrobe, and jewelry, including my mother's pearl necklace, were liquidated under court supervision. Chloe was forced to sell her Italian gown and move out of the Beacon Hill residence. With her reputation in Boston society completely destroyed, her engagement canceled, and her social media accounts flooded with public outrage, she left Massachusetts entirely. Last I heard, she is working as a desk clerk at a motel in New Hampshire, paying off personal debts. because Evelyn's personal assets were insufficient to cover the full $2.4 million restitution. The civil court ruled that the vendors who received stolen trust funds, including Grand Oak Manor and the luxury bridal atelier, were required under the Fraudulent Transfer Act to disgorge and return their fees directly to the estate. By October 2026, the Alina Vance Legacy Trust was fully restored. Today is Saturday, August 15, 2026. I am sitting in a sunlit office on the third floor of St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Outside my window, construction crews are putting the final touches on a 4-story glass and steel building. Above the main entrance, brushed steel letters read, "The Alina Vance Pediatric Oncology Pavilion." In 3 months, I will turn 30 years old. I don't care about luxury cars, Beacon Hill brownstones, or society galas. I live in my same apartment in Somerville. I still work as a forensic accountant, helping victims of financial abuse trace stolen funds and reclaim their lives. My mother's oak table sits in my dining room now. Every Saturday morning, I make a cup of tea, sit down at that table, and open her old financial ledgers. I don't look at them with sadness anymore. I look at them with pride. If you are watching this, and you find yourself in a situation where people are lying about you, where you are being silenced, where toxic family members are using your kindness as a weapon, I want to tell you something. Don't scream. Don't fight on their level. Don't waste your breath trying to convince people who are determined not to hear you. Instead, gather your facts. Build your structure brick by brick. Document everything. Wait for the right moment and let the truth do the work for you. Lies require constant maintenance, performance, and energy to keep alive. But the truth just sits there, patient and unmovable, waiting for the audit. I am Lauren Vance. I am 29 years old, and my mother's legacy is finally safe. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of the power of holding your ground and standing up for what is right, please leave a comment below. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have let the wedding happen, or would you have stopped it sooner? Thank you for being here with me tonight. I'll see you in the next story.